It took me 5 years to feel so at peace. I stared at the scene before me. It almost looked like artwork to me, like a masterpiece. The dead men kneeled at my feet, offering me their blood, cleansing me inside out. My purification started that day. I felt lighter, like years of weight had been finally lifted from my breast, from my entire body and spirit. I was finally satiated and one with my spirit. The spectacle before my eyes was the best piece of artwork ever. It unfolded like a painting from the Dark Ages. I made myself a mug of liquor, dipped my finger in the blood, letting a drop cling onto my fingertip, then dripping it inside my drink. Then I gulped it all, feeling the liquor burn through my body, strengthening me, the metallic smell of blood overwhelmingly pleasing to me. I hopped off the counter gingerly, licked my axe clean, and knelt on the floor to coat myself with more blood. Then I knelt on my knees and prostrated, pressing my lips against the bloodied floor, kissing it softly as a token of gratification to all these filthy men I rid myself of. I slowly walked through the exit, coated in blood, Cassandra in my hand. It was midnight and very dark outside. I let the moonlight bathe my blood-smeared body. Fire burned through me. At first, I thought it was the booze rushing through me, but then I gasped as I noticed my body. No, I thought, scared for the first time. I had not the slightest idea what the hell was happening to me. It could not be a hallucination or a dream because I could feel it, not just on the inside but outside too. My muscles were becoming taut as my skin started thickening up. It was almost as if the moonlight was seeping into me, making the outer layer of blood on me smoother and shinier, giving it an almost metallic texture. I just stood there and gawked at my arms in the moonlight. Under the pale glow of the moonlight, the blood on me thickened and spread evenly, covering my skin up like an outer shell, almost like an external exoskeleton. My eyes drifted down to my chest, my thighs, my crotch, and my legs. The same thing was happening all over my body. My skin and the blood on it merged to form a red metallic layer all over my body. The beautiful red metal gleamed in the powdery glow of the moon. In the cold moonlight, I had just transformed into a superior being, and the feeling was exquisite. I was finally, in the most holistic sense, down to the smallest cell of my body, pure. The filth that plagued the rest of the humanity had just been lifted off from me, and I was free and cleansed. But more importantly, I was now infinitely powerful. I felt the power surge through me in a burst of metallic warmth. I was a man no more. I was a being of the bloodied night. I thought of townsfolk finding out about the massacre I had just caused, and smiled to myself. I ran my hands over the rest of my body, feeling the smooth metallic layer all over my being. I had a cocoon now, an inbuilt armor, and I was invincible. I was the Spring-Heeled Jack. The Moors and the Spring-Heeled Jack. I was truly free and all-powerful. I refrained from exercising my powers needlessly, but sometimes I could not resist. I wanted to carry the scent of blood with me, and you'd be surprised, but all these years I have made sure that it clings to me. It has morphed into my natural scent now. Killing does not thrill me as much as free-flowing blood does. My spirit feels warmer when I coat myself with it. I was free, and there was no way I was going back to my cottage in my newer form. I headed to the place I loved the most, the moors nearby. I would sit there for hours, carving out little wooden knickknacks as a boy during my free time. I thought it was time to revive some of my old habits. So I sat there in the beautiful moors, carving out little wooden toys all night, since I did not seem to need any sleep. My new self gave me several perks. My restlessness was gone, and I felt so much lighter than I ever did before. It was like a height had lifted off me. The weight of humane clumsiness. Feeling lighter meant I could run faster and hoist myself over walls easily. That was a skill I used very often to escape or keep from getting detected by the townsfolk. I was not particularly afraid of the townsfolk that prey in the dark and were the easiest to catch. I wanted to keep them in the dark and scared. I thrived on their collective paranoia, overbearing council sessions. I was then spring-heeled. I skipped fences, house walls, and could not be contained. I was also stronger now, with no need for Cassandra, my axe. But I still kept it around, a souvenir to my times of human vulnerability and my dependency of the weapon. I could only curl my metallic fingers and rake them through a person's flesh, ripping their body to shreds when I felt like it. I kept myself contained and picked only the choicest of prey. On nights with the full moon did I feel a special need to fulfill my need to get more blood on me. The nighttime and the evening I owned. I spent most of my days hiding out or resting in the moors. I even took up wood carving all over again. It was a nice pastime. Speaking of time, it was incredibly difficult to make the time pass. I engaged in casual folly then, teasing and scaring town people without coming into focus. Their weak eyes wandered as they pondered nervously over the source of mischief. I often left them with an audible souvenir, my shrill little giggles. The details of these activities are quite blurry. I loved the fear I stirred up in their minds. It had been a while, and I wished to find more blood to sustain myself, so I haunted the town at night looking for suitable victims. I frequented the darkest paths, reserved for the horrors of the town. One night, I found two prostitutes walking through an empty street, and I decided it was about time I pounced. The two women screamed, but I grabbed one around my waist, slowly digging my claw-like fingers into her soft, warm flesh. I pressed my cold, hard lips against her neck, and then bit her hard, tearing out a chunk of flesh. At the same time, I raked my hands across her waist, disemboweling her hastily, letting her blood spray my crotch and waist. The other woman, a faster one, stood there, stunned, then attempted to run. I skipped over to her, grabbing her by the hair, spinning her around roughly, making her face me. Slowly, I inched my finger down, tearing her corset, and digging my hands into the softness of her chest, slowly prying it apart, splitting the whore in two. I let her blood spray all over me, basking in its warmth and silkiness. Feeling myself emitting warmth, I knew that my spirit was aglow. I left those bodies there and skipped over roofs and fences, making my way back to the moors where my peaceful grassy cradle and wooden saddle awaited. I knew this incident would get noticed after a while and contribute to the paranoia surrounding our town. The council would then be bound to take some action. I leered. Like they can never hurt me if they catch me. The night I killed those two women marked the weekly anniversary of my initial anniversary. That was the night when I fell asleep like a coma. I dreamt. Oh, how vividly I dreamt that night. I dreamt I was on the roof of a house. Judging from the aroma surrounding the house, I guessed I was at the baker's house. I looked around myself. Indeed, it was the baker's house. Rebecca's house. Rebecca had grown into quite a lovely young woman. In my dream, I saw her walk out of her house with a basket full of loaves and melt into the darkness. She left behind her a trail of blood and her perfumed scent. It smelled of stale rose petals and bloodied lips. I leapt off the roof and picked up something she left behind. I grimaced. It was her blood-smeared bonnet. I lifted it up and inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of blood intermingled with the perfume of Rebecca. I then woke up drenched in sweat, the taste of blood a drop away from my lips. I gripped fistfuls of grass and lifted it to the nose, realizing the grass oddly retained the smell from my dream. Her scent. I lay back in the moonlight, thinking back to when I was 9 and Rebecca's best friend. I closed my eyes, letting my memories stray that night. Oh, how foolish was I, wasting my time over an ungrateful damsel. I even thought of purifying her soul, but dismissed the thought, because I would not bear descent by an equally powerful mate. I wanted to steal her that night. My memories were like little wisps of smoke. When I was 9, I told Rebecca I would forever be her playmate. We drew little squares up on the pavement with the colored chalk we would steal together and play hopscotch, making invisible grand cities with paved roads and whatnot. I even showed her my craftsmanship, carving for her a doe. I was an extremely shy child, and nobody but my father and mother had seen my woodwork. It was a private side of me that I had barely exposed. But this was all before Cousin Richard came. With his good looks and boyish charm winning all the girls over even before we were of age. Rebecca, like others, started tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as she talked to him, and bit her lower lip when she talked of him. Slowly, the distance between us increased. In all honesty, I did not care much for her now. Now that I was all-powerful and owned everyone's life, including hers. I thought of the 5 years I had to spend training in the armory. And recalled that I had made with myself certain vows. Now that I had walked past my milestones, it was time to live under promises I made with myself. The death of Richard. I was haunting the streets one night near Rebecca's house when I spotted her in a dark dead end with another man. I walked closer to them and realized that she was with Richard. He stood there, gazing into her eyes, and she stretched onto her tiptoes to kiss him on the lips.
"Oh, Richard, I do love you," said Rebecca.
I stared at Richard as he flashed her that dimpled smile I so loathed. I calmed myself down, telling myself soon I would be the one smiling. Richard's straying hand wandered, reaching up the hem of her skirt as she giggled playfully. I smirked. The honorable member of the town guard should know better than to remain in the streets after darkness nowadays. I walked into the street, deliberately making noise so the couple startled at my approach. As Rebecca saw me, she let out a little squeal. I doubt she recognized me. I smiled at her and Richard. Richard immediately moved to come between her and me, and I cackled. He took out his dagger, holding it up. I laughed again, making him uneasy. Rebecca clinging onto his back. "Back off. I'm armed," Richard murmured smoothly. Oh well. It seemed Cousin Richard was good at concealing his fear. Spending years in the honorable guard must have taught him a little, at least. But if you stared hard enough into his eyes, you could see the fear. I stepped towards him. He lunged at me with his dagger, and it screeched against my skin. He was stunned for a moment. I used the moment to my advantage by clawing at his face, my fingers leaving rivulets of blood in their wake. Then I sank my fingers into his chest, digging them deeper and deeper as he writhed in pain, using my other hand to slit his skin horizontally, digging into him in a criss-crossed pattern before pushing him down. I let the blood drain from him, as his screams turned into groans. "The toad will take the princess," I whispered into his ear, watching his eyes almost bulge out of their sockets. I then turned my attention towards sweet Rebecca, who stood there, sobbing and stunned, almost slipping into a delicious delirium. I leant closer to her as she snapped back to her senses, trying to dash from me. I dug my fingers into her wrist, pulling her back to me as she struggled vulnerably. I used my fingers to rip apart her blouse, exposing her to the moonlight. Her body heaved as she sobbed. The moment I touched her, she recoiled from me. My fingers must have been cold because they raised little goosebumps in their wake. Or was it fear? I was too taken by her to tell. I shoved her against the wall and reached over, snatching off her bonnet, letting her hair fall freely around her body. The same bonnet I had been dreaming of for 5 years. I dipped it in Richard's blood, clawing out his flesh with both hands, scratching off half of his face as he almost fainted. I smelled the blood-soaked bonnet. Her scent matched with fresh, warm blood. Her blood is fusing with my blood. I slowly ran the bonnet over her face and chest, staining it red as she screamed in horror, and passed out in my arms. Then I licked blood off of her and decided not to slay her. I walked over to Richard and finally put him out of his misery by snuffing out his life, rubbing his blood all over my body, killing my desires. I then claimed Rebecca, and when I was done with her, left her there, bleeding, but alive in the street. I leaped over the wall, grinning to myself, thinking, I've saved her for another day. The Mad Lady. In retrospect, leaving Rebecca in that dark alleyway was an interesting choice I made. It completely shaped her future from that point onward. At dawn, a member of the town guard stumbled into that street. Ha! Those good-for-nothing clowns! The only task they are capable of performing now is cleaning up after my exit from the crime scene. The town guard found a defiled, naked, unconscious lady on the pavement next to the leader of the town guard. At first, he thought they were both dead. He ventured carefully to the crime scene, so as not to disturb any piece of evidence. He reached closer and saw the condition Richard's body was in, turning purple in the face with sheer disgust. I was almost positive he would have retched from the smell and the flies. He shifted his attention towards the woman, and noticed she was breathing. He averted his gaze from the several bruises and caked blood he saw all over her. That was me, of course. For some reason, I felt the need to leave my mark all over this woman. He took her pulse and realized she was alive. He promptly notified the town guard, and people rushed in to help. Rebecca finally woke up, dazed and sore in the infirmary. In case you were wondering how I got to know this, I just wanted to keep a close eye on her. I'm glad I did. It was almost fascinating in the way events unfolded afterwards. The town guard at first considered her a suspect in the murder, but they soon realized this murder bore similarities to the murder of the 2 prostitutes. Also, they recovered the dagger and affirmed that the wounds were not inflicted using the dagger. There was no other weapon on site, and how could a woman even injure a man without a weapon? How could a man even injure a man like that? Richard's body was in the most grotesque form possible. When Rebecca woke, she slipped into depression after hearing of Richard's death. I found her delicious little sobs amusing. Oh, true love. The sheriff came over from the city council to meet her personally and jot down her account of what happened. When Rebecca finally spoke, she spoke of a red being, an unidentified entity with the body of a man, color of blood, and metallic talons of a falcon. Her first-hand account was declared inaccurate and weak. Nobody even believed her narrative and thought she had a concussion. She was then declared mentally unsound. And shifted to an insane asylum. I still keep watch around it till date. I frequent her cell too, peeking in from the window, sometimes smiling as she screams. Many times did the nurses send someone to check outside, and found nothing. Because it's not for nothing that they call me the Spring-Heeled Jack. Her outbursts usually result in the nurses assuming it is hysteria, and sedating her to numb her sense. I love it when she slips into a stupor. She just gazes blankly at the walls. It is within my power to barge in and snatch her out, claiming what is mine, but I would rather let her suffer for now. I have not yet decided what I would do with her. I often think she is the last speck of filth on me, and if I rid myself of her, I would achieve a greater satisfaction. Maybe one day, when I feel like tasting her again. In the meanwhile, based on the account she gave to the police, several fables about me surfaced. People are insane. Their imaginations just need the slightest push, and they go off spinning stories like spiders spin up nets, entrapping each other in partial lies and specks of truth. I have emerged as a bedtime story, a fabled villain in a town-based legend. Several depictions and descriptions of me have surfaced over the last few years. In some, I almost look like a lobster. In the other clippings, I have been accused of committing the pettiest crimes possible, like stealing grocery, etc. It is those articles that make me laugh. Sometimes I let the eyewitnesses survive. It is more fun that way. I genuinely enjoy the hype and the social stigma eyewitnesses have to face when they make the claim that they have seen me. Humans. Oddly vulnerable people with fragile brains ready to shatter into 1,000 different shards in the presence of a sliver of truth. I stay by the moors and enjoy all the publicity I can get. Last Monday, there was an article about how I stole newborns from a dilapidated neighborhood. What in the world would I need children for? I did raid other places now. In secluded neighborhoods and abandoned streets mostly. Those murders are the easiest to commit, and those people have the warmest blood. I gathered it is because they carry with themselves the strongest will to live. Or maybe not? There is no need for me to get philosophical. From what I know, there is nobody else like me in this region or the world. That puts me in an absolute position of power. I stand in the moors, majestically governing my entire kingdom. I was born to be the pure messiah of these people. It is almost as if I was born to liberate them from their humanly plights like greed, money, sickness, and simply put an end to their filthiness. I continue to do mankind a service by cleansing myself and the earth of its burden. I do need a proper bloodbath, though, and lately I have been thinking of launching a sortie in a particularly crowded place. I almost want to douse the arena in the blood of all the cowardly voyeurs who frequent it for fun. After all, it's the place where it all started from. Epilogue. I could pluck Rebecca up from the asylum, use her, and keep her chained in my humble mansion as either a slave or finally end her life by soaking in the smallest bit of her essence. Both expressions of power seem equally tempting to me, and I hope I decide one day. Also, I often wonder what happened to the heart chewer. Did he survive long enough to earn his freedom? When I look in the mirror, I see the same twinkle in my eye, and I have not been able to comprehend what that means. Is he close to the realization too? Perhaps he was just a seasoned man accustomed to death. I shall pay the arena a visit very soon, though. For now, I'm content with my life. The day I am not, I will rip everyone apart. I would go to any limit to satiate myself. Sincerely, Spring-Heeled Jack.